My name is Elise Roche, and I lead our Data for Social and Environmental Impact initiatives here at Google Cloud. And today we're here to talk to you a bit about what Google Cloud is doing for nonprofit organizations today, and also to welcome some panelists on stage as well to talk about their work in the data for good space. So to begin, I'd like to start with a quote from Jake Porway, who is the founder and executive director of DataKind. And if you're unfamiliar with DataKind, they are a nonprofit organization that helps to match pro bono data scientists, analysts, and designers with mission-driven organizations to apply big data solutions to real-world challenges. And the quote is as follows: "We see so many opportunities for data science to change the world, but so many organizations don't have access to that technology." And so we can notice that there is a gap here. But what if we could use big data solutions to cure Alzheimer's, code food, and even solve unemployment? At Google Cloud, we have been working with nonprofit organizations for quite some time in order to identify ways to empower them to achieve their missions at scale by using cloud computing solutions. Starting in 2007 with Google Earth Outreach, we've been able to empower nonprofit organizations with access to premium Maps APIs so they can bring their stories to life. In 2011, G Suite for Nonprofits launched, which enabled nonprofits to collaborate and innovate together. And in 2016, we actually launched GCP Public Datasets, which helped to democratize access to planetary scale datasets and actually allows anyone to query that data up to 1 terabyte per month for free. We have datasets from organizations like the World Bank, the EPA, NOAA, just to name a few. And in 2018, here we are at Next, and so naturally the question is, what is next? We realize that big data solutions in particular can empower nonprofit organizations to achieve a variety of things, some of which are just listed here on this slide. We can help nonprofit organizations scale their data, to analyze data at the scale of the entire web with BigQuery, to tap into artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms, and to also visualize their data to tell compelling stories that help to drive action. And so with that, we're announcing a new initiative that we have launched today at Next called Data Solutions for Change. With Data Solutions for Change, we're really looking to continue to empower nonprofit organizations to achieve their missions at scale. And we've been working with several nonprofits for quite some time in order to conduct qualitative research and to work together in a hands-on capacity to actually determine, what do they really need and how can we truly help them. And so we've been able to essentially develop these core benefits that you can see on the slide here. We understand that nonprofits often face financial and technical barriers, and so we are now offering nonprofit organizations and NGOs the opportunity to apply for a 6-month grant period, during which time they'll receive up to $30,000 in a cloud credit grant, need-based, self-training resources through Quick Labs, and also hands-on support with Google Cloud customer support at the developer level. We are also working with Accenture and encouraging nonprofit organizations to reach out to them to learn more about support options. So we're really looking to address, again, the financial and the technical enablement here with this program. And with that, we'd like to share just a couple of highlights from some of the organizations that we've been working with to date. One of them is the Foundation for Precision Medicine. So the Foundation for Precision Medicine is actually using BigQuery and machine learning algorithms to better detect Alzheimer's disease. There's currently no cure for the disease, so the best way to actually get ahead of it is to literally get ahead of it by diagnosing the disease months or even years in advance of a traditional diagnosis. That way they're actually able to explore preventative treatment options. With the Open Agriculture Foundation, they're using BigQuery and IoT Core in order to build more innovative and sustainable food systems. They are an extension of MIT's Open Agriculture Initiative, where they're building food computers, these proprietary devices, where they're actually able to identify plant code and actually shift a variety of different variables in order to optimize plant production. and the Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator, who's using BigQuery and machine learning to better match unemployed youth in South Africa to jobs across South Africa. And so with that, we would like to share a short video.
Harambee means we win when we pull together. We started Harambee to take on the challenge of youth unemployment in South Africa. We have 6 million unemployed youth. There's a whole lot of exclusionary barriers for young people trying to break into the economy. We decided to work with Google Cloud because we needed to operate at large scale across the population.
I didn't know how to do your CV because at school we didn't do computer. The internet was very foreign for me.
I remember the first CVs which I made, I had to get a paper and just write it with my own hands because I didn't even have money to go and print out a CV.
Harambee's had 1.3 million candidates in our database. That's resulted in over 50,000 opportunities. What machine learning allows us is the ability to innovate and create new solutions for solving youth unemployment in South Africa.
Before, we had our data in many different locations. It wasn't managed very well. As we migrated our data into Google Cloud, then we were able to understand employers and candidates. BigQuery allows us to access our data for our candidates very quickly.
Harambee's approach to job matching is to include unemployed youth previously excluded from the labor market. So we use a lot of data points and competency skills that don't traditionally get used in the world of employment.
What we're building is a pathwaying platform that looks to bridge gaps of young people and nudge them closer to opportunities in the economy.
The data we're gathering allows us to shine a light on all the great things that they can be and are.
I am finding my purpose where I want to be.
Harambee has given me hope. I am confident enough to conquer the world and to make a difference out there.
So that was a short clip that we created with Harambee, who's actually here with us today. It was very exciting to work with them together on this video. We also created another video with the Foundation for Precision Medicine, also here today, and you can see both of these online. I'll share a link at the end of this presentation. So with that, in addition to the nonprofit program, we also started thinking, well, what are the opportunities to actually inspire the next generation of data scientists and analysts and designers to join this growing data for good movement and to drive real change? And so we're also happy to announce today the Visualize 2030 contest, whose name essentially is a nod towards the UN's 2030 agenda. So with Visualize 2030, we're talking about data stories for the SDGs. We're asking students at the college and graduate level to apply and submit a data story that actually tells a story around at least 2 of the Sustainable Development Goals. As a bit of context, there are 17 of them, and they range from anything from preserving biodiversity to ending poverty. And we're asking them to tell a story around these SDGs, how they influence each other, and how we can reach them by 2030 together. And so we are also offering a prize, well, 5 prizes for the top 5 submissions. The top 5 submissions will receive a $10,000 cash prize, an announcement during the UN World Data Forum taking place in Dubai, and also publication by Google Cloud. And this is particularly exciting because we're not doing this alone. Part of the Data for Good movement is collaboration. A huge part of it is collaboration. And so we're working together with the World Bank, the United Nations Foundation, and also the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. And with that, I would like to welcome the panelists to the stage to share their work, their experience, and generally speak to how we can leverage big data solutions to drive real change today.
Welcome, everyone.
So to get started, I thought it would be great for them to just go through a round of introductions briefly and share who they are, which organizations they work for, and what their role is.
Hi there, I'm Jennifer Oldfield. I'm the Communications Director of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. It's such a mouthful, but you can just think of us as data for SDGs. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Davis Adieno. I'm the Africa Regional Manager for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data based out of Nairobi, Kenya. Great pleasure to be here.
Hi, my name's Andrew Whitby. I'm a data scientist at the World Bank. So most people have heard of the bank, but generally speaking, we're a development finance institution, so we make concessional loans to fund development projects in countries around the world.
Thank you. My name is Ayn Wala. I'm the Chief Data Scientist at Foundation for Precision Medicine, and we are in an intersection of AI and healthcare.
Good. Hi, everyone. I'm Evan Jones. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Harambee Youth Accelerator, and I have the privilege of leading the team on the video that you saw a few moments ago.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ian Lobo. I'm one of the managing directors with Accenture Development Partnerships, which is our social impact business within Accenture, which focuses on providing our core services to the international development sector, but then also representing the broader Accenture business and other ways for us to collaborate for social impact.
Wonderful, thank you. So to get started with the first question, in your opinion, what is the role or potential of data analytics in the humanitarian and public sector? Don't all jump in at once.
Sorry.
Yeah, big question. Hopefully short answer. I know we don't have the whole afternoon. Really, when you look at the broad spectrum of the Sustainable Development Goals, as you've said, which is the United Nations and all of our countries' transformative agenda, data is at the core of that agenda because we are talking about having a data revolution, doing things differently, finding new approaches, new methods, making new connections, collaborations, catalyzing innovation, and finding new ways really to connect the dots among us different data communities, be it government through official statistics, the private sector. We have citizen-generated data that comes from civil society and other community groups. All these different varieties of data, when you look at the whole data value chain, from production to the effective use, require some form of analytics. And without this, it becomes very problematic to derive insights. Often we talk about making data available or producing it or opening it up. But from our experience and what we've seen, really, the problem is in the use of that data. Often decision makers are faced with big questions. They either have the gaps, they don't know, or they don't have the right data to tell them what's really happening. And if they do have that data, there are many other factors that influence the decisions they make. So we have to effectively invest in methodologies that allow us to draw insights that speak to a number of different audiences. Even ordinary citizens want to understand what's happening so that they can take action in their own communities. And I think the role of analytics and new methodologies around machine learning can really help us bridge that gap and help us to really define what we think may be the more appropriate ways to do things differently to achieve the SDGs. Thank you.
So when we think about the size of the problem in South Africa, it's 6 million unemployed youth. And if you think about the size of the problem in Africa, our generation will see close to 1 billion youth out of work. Whilst we have big operations, actually see ourselves as more labor market change agents, ecosystem managers. And if we really want to shift the dial on the unemployment issue, certainly in South Africa, we have to shift government. I mean, they've got fiscus that's being spent on skills development. We have to enable other operators. Harambee will never, ever operate at the sort of scale of the problem. And in doing so, we see data at the core of solving this. We have the largest data set on unemployed youth in South Africa. How can we make this data available to many, not just to Harambee? How do we use our intelligence for many, not just for Harambee? How do we use our data to shift policy for government? And that's the direction we're heading, and using technology to enable that system change, big bet system change. And that's the role data is playing in our world.
Yeah, and I think I can build on that a little bit. With the power of data, we can actually see the entire population now. Maybe we were not able to do that. And for nonprofit work, you want to have your services available to everyone. Inclusivity is very important to our work. So I think with data, you're able to see those populations that you didn't maybe were able to see before.
I think we're preaching to the choir here because everybody in this room knows about the importance of data for social change. But I guess just to make the point that in the public sector and in governments, the kind of skills base can be pretty low and the understanding can be pretty low. So the competition that we're doing today is about sort of raising awareness and trying to, explain why it's important in layman's terms.
And one last piece, I think, to complement what's been said is it's about bringing all the sectors together. So a lot of the work that, we do within Accenture with our private sector clients, they're facing the same challenges about data visibility on the ground. Same for government, same for not-for-profits, communities and beyond. So I do think this is an unprecedented opportunity for us, through collective action, through initiatives like Data for SDGs and beyond, to really work together, share the data, and actually be able to tackle this problem at the size and scope and complexity to actually enable that type of systems change.
And just, if I can pick up on something Jennifer said, I mean, a lot of the sessions I've been to at this conference, it's clear that people are working in startups or online businesses where not having enough data is not a problem, right? You have huge amounts of data on all of your users. But anyone who's worked in government will know that government is not necessarily that organized and doesn't have a huge amount of data on who their citizens are. And in certain parts of the world, there's very little data on who the people are that government and government programs are trying to serve, or about the places, about the environment, that kind of thing. So I think there's a huge potential just by collecting small amounts of data to really better understand the problems that we're trying to solve. And that's kind of what the data agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals is really trying to do.
Thank you. So another question for you. What is your background or area of expertise, and how do you bring that to data for social and environmental change?
I guess I'll start because I'm among the least technical of the group. I'm a communications director, so my background is in, I used to literally run the Prime Minister of the UK's Twitter account, so it wasn't that technical and it was quite fun. But through that, I got to see the kind of two-way communication between citizens and government, and I became very inspired to get into sort of asking people directly in open consultations and then citizen-generated data. So that's a kind of an expanding area of interest for government, and then the communications is really important. Thanks.
Yeah, I've sort of adopted a technical and worn a technical hat over the last couple of years, but my background really is design and architecture. And I went into development work around 8 years ago, basically driven by the passion that development projects deliver impact on the lives of people, and for me that's the key driver, I would say, or the incentive. Ultimately, I had today in another session someone saying, we have to connect the dots. We have to put people or ensure that the dots that are represented really represent people and the voices of people. So for me, my background really is trying to bridge the gap between different data communities and defining strategies that then help them to produce better data that speaks to the needs of people at the subnational level, at the national level, and connecting to the regional and the global levels. And the reason why we have to do this is because the global policy agenda is set, for example, at the UN headquarters in New York. But people are living real lives at the community level in different countries. And often you find that there is a huge disconnect between what is being discussed at the global level and what is really happening in people's lives, including the SDGs. Different countries are struggling because people don't really understand them. So we have to figure creative ways, and for me, creative ways means, finding ways in which we can think outside the box, and think outside the box and not only define what it actually looks like to achieve impact. Often that is vague, but also bring citizens' voices into the conversation in a way that truly matters to them and is transformative in their lives.
Yeah, so my job title is data scientist, and I'm happy to embrace that kind of personality. My original background was in computer science and economics, and that was computer science before machine learning was cool again. So it's been kind of interesting to go through, I kind of moved over to economics and did a PhD in econometrics with a kind of mathematical stats bent to it. But it's interesting now to be in this world where data is cool and machine learning and AI and all these kind of buzzwords are out there now, and also doing really cool things that weren't possible a while ago. So I've kind of long been a data user, and now I'm sort of in a position at the World Bank where we're a big data producer. We collect a lot of data, we sort of add value, and then we publish it to the world. And so it's kind of nice to be sort of involved in that pipeline of making data sets available that people find really useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, my background is also in data science and machine learning, and I have a team of data scientists and statisticians that I work with on a daily basis. I think the difference between me and maybe some other data scientists is that, or at least what people think, is the more I understood about machine learning data science, the more I appreciate the domain knowledge and the domain expertise that other people bring in. And I found out that, everything is numbers to us, but, you have to go talk to people who have been doing that kind of work for years before to put some context to what, now we have data on, and we can bring our own expertise to it and, fix the problem from a different angle.
So 4 years ago, I got given the title of CIO by my CEO, and I thought she was crazy because I have no technical background whatsoever. But I have the great privilege of a very competent technical team that's actually with me here today, our architects and developers. I actually worked with a large system integrator for many years, working in business process, offshoring and outsourcing into South Africa. And just a little bit of background on that, South Africa's just been ranked number 2 preferred offshoring destination in the world, second to India. It's a high growth sector. There is a lot of lobbying amongst government and business to really grow the sector over the next couple of years. And I was very much involved in that and got very excited by the idea of job creation in a country that desperately needs it with such high unemployment rates. And that was really my hook into Harambee. And the big question on our mind 4 years ago was, how do we scale our impact? We're very proud of the 55,000 young people we've placed into the economy, but it's a scratch on the surface. And really working with our executive to think about enablement for scale. And we've walked a technology journey and sourced a number of technology giants such as the Google Cloud Platform in helping us enable that vision.
And from my perspective, I come at this from a business strategist perspective, which is focused first on how are we going to solve this problem about the scale, the complexity, and beyond. How do we kind of use technology to our favor? How do we use data to our favor? So it's kind of going beyond a cool prototype, what could be happening, localized pilots, into fundamentally, how do we target the value and unleash it? And I think another piece of that is around partnerships. So, for the last 15 years, been working on cross-sector and intra-industry partnerships to really figure out ways for us to work together, share the competencies, get that momentum going to really drive that type of change. So I see very much, it's a CEO level conversation, executive director level conversation within the not-for-profits to kind of make that shift. And then, of course, using technology as one of the enablers for that strategy, rather than just kind of the bottom up. Here's some of the tech around it. Here's some of the data. If you're not getting that kind of absolute intricate realization of your leadership team that this is important, this is what we need to do to be successful as a not-for-profit, if it's not going to actually optimize the way your organization's working, the way you're doing programs, then it's a bit of a lost cause. So I think this top-down, bottom-up approach is the right way to be going.
I guess just to add to that, we worked with Accenture at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data to help us strategize around engaging the private sector. And they had a great approach that we sort of discussed called the octopus approach, where basically there should be connectors at every level. The CEO should know the CEO, and the communications should know the communications. And through that way, you can really kind of get that holistic approach rather than that just solely kind of thinking of it as a sort of CSR only kind of connector. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So another question, given your experience and everything that you just shared, what are creative applications of data analytics and machine learning that you've seen, and what made that particular example inspiring or particularly effective?
For us, the kind of most exciting expanding area of data is around satellite and Earth observation data for SDGs. And there are so many different potential applications. We've just launched a Africa Regional Data Cube, so a sort of open infrastructure for the governments that we work with to access that and to kind of develop algorithms that can then be shared. But some of the most exciting developments that, it's very early days, but basically they're looking into things like predicting illegal mining in Ghana, sort of mapping deforestation in Kenya. We're sort of investigating possible use of radar data intersected with Landsat data to look at landslides in Sierra Leone and, understanding that depth of different buildings. So we've only just scratched the surface, but there are so many creative applications, and there's a lot of kind of inter-country sharing, as well as working with the different partners like NASA, the Committee on Earth Observations, the Group on Earth Observations, a whole host of others who are getting around the table to achieve that multi-partnership, stakeholder partnership.
One of the examples that we've seen the most kind of momentum happening quite quickly was with a large international NGO that is one of the biggest child sponsorship not-for-profits in the world. And the challenge they were facing was around how do we quickly kind of analyze the photographs to kind of create that intimate relationship between a child and the sponsor. What we're able to do very, very quickly, like within a matter of weeks, was develop a prototype using artificial intelligence to do a photo analyzer solution to automatically detect, are these appropriate pictures, make sure we're matching it correctly, and then, of course, minimize the amount of human intervention required. And I guess coming back to the stripes that I shared just now and the lens that I bring is what was exciting was it was very quick. We proved that you can use artificial intelligence in a not-for-profit in weeks, not months or years, and with significant amount of investment. It was focused on a big problem they were facing. And then what was kind of piggybacking on top of that was the business case. How do we actually put the financial case of saying you can actually save X amount of dollars if you actually look at rolling this out across regions? So, with that actual financial case kind of underpinning a proof of concept, it was able to quickly go from prototype into scale across multiple offices.
Yeah, I can add on quickly to that. We work on projects that are, promote personalized medicine, that have, social impact factors and within healthcare. we saw a need in Alzheimer's disease, and we started this initiative. And Alzheimer's disease is one of the, it's the sixth leading cause of death in U.S., and there is no method of early detection for it, similar to cancer or other things. And we saw that, we have millions of patient records, de-identified patient records, and we know, which ones got Alzheimer's disease. So we wanted to see, can we predict the disease in patients early on? And by the way, can we make that available for everyone so they can punch in their information and see what they get? In U.S., we have access to expensive MRI machines and those things that, if you want to, you really can get to the bottom of it. But in underdeveloped countries, you're not able to do that. So we have an algorithm that looks into medications and historical diagnoses and give chances of Alzheimer's to patients who are 70 or 80 years old. And they're able to access that anywhere in the world that have internet.
So the World Bank's goal is to eliminate poverty in the world, and one of the kind of contradictions I find in my role is that the poorest countries are often also the data poor countries, right? So traditionally the bank would spend a lot of money on sort of on-the-ground survey collection and stuff like that before preparing for a project. So echoing what Jennifer said, I think Earth observation data, satellite data is exciting because it's something that you can cover the whole world. And so potentially applying some of the stuff that's being done in kind of image recognition to apply that to top-down satellite imagery has interesting applications. So one I saw recently at the bank was a team working on identifying infrastructure from above, so identifying electricity transmission lines from what you can just see above. You can sort of see the towers in high-resolution satellite imagery. So that kind of thing, I think, has a lot of potential to sort of reduce the expense of making those investments, which benefits people.
Yeah, and just to build on your point, Andrew, I think what I really see is opportunity. Opportunity for machine learning, for artificial intelligence, because the rate at which technology is moving is quite fast. And there's always the potential to leave a lot of people behind. And we are talking about leaving no one behind with the SDGs. As soon as you think you've learned and mastered something, and you're at the bingo stage, somebody's knocking on the window or the door with some new technology, which is fancier, is better, is doing amazing things. That's a great opportunity, really, of our time. But the challenge is that if you're to look at people in low-income countries or developing countries, you find that the investments they make in systems, in infrastructure, in software, people want to invest once and hopefully that serves them for 5 years. And within 5 years, the rate at which we are moving, technology really transforms very fast. So there is an opportunity really to start thinking about the more sustainable ways in which we can extract data, we can extract learning. And I think machine learning, AI really provide that opportunity to work with governments that potentially may struggle in some of these areas, to develop the capacity of civil society organizations, to bring in academia, because I think that's potentially one really big area. If we institutionalize a lot of capacity within institutions of learning, universities, high schools, even starting at kindergarten. Now in Kenya, we are providing tablets to primary school kids, in a bid to introduce them to technology. And this is provided free of charge by the government, because there is that recognition that unless we really adapt technology and start figuring out how we can effectively use these devices, then it's going to be difficult and we'll be left behind as a country. So that's really the opportunity I see. And I think by working together with the private sector, with government, and many other data communities, really we can achieve it.
Wonderful, thank you. So moving on to another question and building off of what you were talking about there on collaborating and working together. So I'd love to hear some examples and just some short stories from you all on how you and your organization have worked with another organization in a different industry or sector, and what was the result of that?
Yeah, maybe to start and not to talk too much. As the global partnership for sustainable development data, really our role is to convene, is to connect, and to catalyze. And in Ghana, for example, when we held a national data roadmaps workshop, which is essentially a convening that brings together different stakeholders to look at how data can be harnessed for sustainable development. Out of that emerged a partnership between Vodafone, Ghana Statistical Services, and Flowminder, which is basically looking at how they can leverage telco data or mine telco data to look at a number of indicators that can support the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals around epidemiology, predicting patterns of disease, and that's a conversation that's currently happening. In Ghana also, and in Sierra Leone, what we're doing is to facilitate engagements between different ministries that are looking at, for example, environment, climate, and the environmental protection agencies are looking at the Ministry of Mining, Ministry of Lands, including the ICT ministries, all have come together. And what we aim to achieve there is, number one, to define frameworks for data sharing, because we realize that there's a lot of duplication of efforts. Everybody's collecting data on the same indicators, and all this data is telling different stories. So collaborating on data sharing frameworks and also figuring out what are the big policy questions that they need to answer. What is the enabling environment for other actors to participate, because it's no longer about government. It's about bringing in other civil society and other groups really to participate. How can donors, for example, better target their resources to interventions that then catalyze better development for people? So there's a number of different initiatives that we are seeing coming up, and of course, we'll be happy to share.
Yeah, we are a nonprofit, and in a nonprofit world, it's very important to be able to collaborate with volunteers and be able to do that very quickly. We get volunteers all the time that they're interested and motivated to work on your data and add value. But for the top talent that that comes by every now and then, you really have to take their attention and be able to collaborate data very quickly. That was one of the main reasons we moved our data to Google Cloud, and we are able to just share our data with a simple Gmail access, just like a Google Doc. And so once we do a simple agreements, they're able to look at the data and move very quickly. And based on that, we were able to actually get a lot more volunteers and work with universities and a couple of medical facilities much faster otherwise.
So part of our mission actually includes working in partnerships. So we have a whole ecosystem of dozens of partners. I could cite examples of transport data. I can cite examples of it's just many examples, working with coding organizations and funneling candidates through. But one in particular that jumps to mind is we've got an initiative with our president's office at the moment. Youth unemployment is the #1 strategic agenda for the country. So they've set a target of absorbing over 1 million youth over the next 3 years into the economy. And what we've done essentially is we've signed an agreement with the presidency to act as a clearinghouse for the country, so that many can access our candidates, many other organizations, not just Harambee. So I think really adopting more of an open source principle to solving this challenge rather than trying to own it and deliver it ourselves.
Yeah, it's hard to pick one partnership because it's like picking your favorite child. But I guess two quick ones are with World Economic Forum. Well, we've been working with them in a couple of geographies around how do we do cluster development. So out in East Africa, it was really trying to bring together the best of the UN, government, private sector, NGOs to develop an agriculture backbone for both local development, local economic opportunities, and beyond. And then also out in Asia, we're doing something very, very similar. I think some of the insights for that is there's so many layers. Doing the partnerships and working together is one thing, and I think that's important to have us there. But I do think coming back to the focus topic here, having the data platform and the ability to share data between organizations starts to move us away from endless pilots, endless prototypes, and beyond into how do we get towards interoperability? How do we get into sharing data between organizations? And we've seen very, very positive signs on the private sector side where, we've had sessions with very senior executives from rabid competitors within consumer goods companies saying that actually we can work together in a pre-competitive space for greater goods and public goods. So I do think that there's an appetite. I'm not saying it's not complex, but I do think even at that level and looking at the private sector with companies that could potentially be competitors, there is massive, massive opportunity and a massive realization that the public goods we're trying to create on the social impact side, no one organization can do on its own. So how do we actually use data? How do we use the platforms? How do we use sharing and interoperability to really fast track progress that we can make?
Wonderful. So in the spirit of collaboration, we would also like to open to the audience questions. If you'd like to ask a question of any of the panelists here today, we actually have a mic that's there in the middle section. So yes, please ask us questions.
Yeah, I have a question. So for pretty much all of you, your work is propelled by some kind of urgency to address a social problem, right? I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how this urgency affects the pace with which you feel you need to work, and whether that creates any tension in your work, for example, between developing something quickly versus securely, or developing something quickly versus cheaply. I would imagine that would happen at times, and wondering if you could elaborate.
That's such a good question. So as you know, we've set ourselves this target of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, and 3 years have elapsed. Just before the firing pistol has gone off, people haven't even really got going. So there is that tremendous pressure, that tremendous tension. And then, we hear people like the Deputy Secretary General of the UN saying some of the data about these Sustainable Development Goals is 5 years old. Like, that's impossible. You can't make decisions on that. So, all of the different sectors have a lot to add. But I think that we can learn from that kind of iterating and moving fast while putting in place the kind of infrastructures that Davis was talking about and others were talking about earlier to sort of share knowledge on privacy, frameworks, security, that sort of thing, in order to enable us to move more quickly.
It's a great question, and we're actually grappling with exactly that on flying here over the weekend. We have a list of priorities, a backlog of development asks from our government partners, from our social investors from around the world, and we actually cannot get to all of it. We cannot capacitate ourselves fast enough to get to all the priorities, and we're having tough discussions around what's important and what's urgent, what's suitable for our future vision for scale and what isn't. And it's a tough trade-off, and we presented to our group of social investors around our strategic priorities, and one of them was, how do we as an organization prioritize for the future much more effectively? But yeah, there's definitely an increased demand on us from multiple people.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, honestly, no one would ever accuse the World Bank or other kind of international organizations of moving really, really quickly. I mean, it's kind of a, if you live in San Francisco and you work for some startup, it's a slow pace relative to that. But you're right, the problems are kind of urgent. But I think it's more important really that we make kind of steady progress towards these things. And so that's where I think setting a goal for 2030 again might sound crazy in a place where your company could be out of business in 6 months, that's your own way or whatever. But at the same time, I think there needs to be steady year-on-year progress to achieve those things, and that's kind of been the past history, right? Is that Global poverty has been declining year on year for quite a long time now. So it's kind of like urgent, but at the same time, like a kind of medium-term goal.
Yeah, I also think, just to build on your point, Andrew, there's the pace at which the global development discourse is moving, but still you have a significantly large proportion of the global population that's in extreme poverty. So there is a gap between the pace of GDP growth, for example, in a country, the rate at which the economy is growing. So you often hear the narrative that, the economy is growing, but a certain proportion, and which tends to be quite a large proportion of that economy, still struggles. So the urgency is, how do we try to equalize? How do we try to bring those at the lowest levels to a level where at least they can start and they can be in a position really to sustain whatever either economic activities or other activities that they're really engaged in. So access to essential government services, access to financial services, access to technology offers that opportunity, and that's the urgency. What you need is capital, to do something, and that's as urgent as yesterday. So it's not an issue of today. Those who are looking for a meal, it's today. If you don't eat, then there's a big problem. There are those who are starving. There are those who are seeking medical services. So the scale of all those problems is quite urgent. So the cost benefit is to think about how do we prioritize and how do we better target our efforts to make sure that we collaboratively really solve some of the big questions we are faced with.
Great, thank you. So we have time for probably one more question and then a lightning round of answers. So go for it.
Hi, so I work for an innovation lab for the local government, and I appreciate your presentation because we're dealing with a lot of the similar issues, like around unemployment of local youth and just the local industry kind of growing so fast, and the residents that are born and kind of grow up here can't afford to stay because they're not able to kind of keep up with the skills and the economy that's changing so fast. So I really kind of wanted to ask some practical advice around what best practices have you found that worked in terms of data sharing or even collecting data, because in government, like those things are like very gnarly things that people don't want to talk about, and there's a lot of kind of privacy issues, like when you're like working with foster kids and just like situations where like people are very kind of protective of data. So how do you even like breach that kind of conversation, and what kind of best practices around establishing new policies and systems can you recommend to help that get going? Thanks.
It's such an important question. So just briefly, I'm excited about the potential of sort of subnational data and local movements. And recently we've seen a number of mayors of cities really kind of growing in profile and sort of harnessing that local expertise. The other thing is, you have local NGOs on the ground who know a lot more about the area, and they're able to kind of tailor solutions. So some of the kind of recording of data at that local level and feeding it back up the chain is really important.
Yeah, in Kenya, we've worked with an organization called the Open Institute, who proactively work with the local administration to collect data. And this data is collected by the community themselves using mobile phone devices on a number of indicators. And just a year ago, they collected data on health, on agriculture and education, and it emerged that their top priority really was a health center in one of the local districts. And they actually used this data and the resulting analysis to petition the county government to construct a health center for them. And the county government responded, and as we speak, the health center is near completion. So there is an opportunity really to use citizens and to work with the local administration and to use evidence, because at the end of the day, it has to be about evidence. What's the impact of not having that health center? If you demonstrate that, then potentially something can be done about it.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think the sort of norms around privacy and consent and so on are constantly shifting. And I'm not sure I have any succinct practical advice other than to say, just because we work in the for good space doesn't excuse us from thinking about those issues just the same as a Google or a Facebook or some other commercial entity.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And next steps. So first, I would encourage you, if you're a nonprofit organization or know a nonprofit organization, to check out Google for Nonprofits. They do incredible work. Two of the programs that I mentioned earlier today, Google Earth Outreach and G Suite for Nonprofits, are available through there, among other programs. So definitely check that out. And also, please look at Data Solutions for Change and Visualize 2030. The websites are there. The websites are live. We're very excited to share that with you all. And thank you.